with your host, RenTen ASMR. In tonight's video, I'll be doing an NFL Week 17 reactions video. So, if you happen to miss any of the action in last weekend's NFL games, don't fear, because I will be relaying to you all of the stats, highlights, and other important controversies that took place during this past weekend. So first up, we'll dive right into the Thursday night matchup, which was a battle between the New York Jets and the Cleveland Browns. The Browns won this game with a final score of 37-20, and the game wasn't particularly close. Going into halftime, the Browns led this one 34-17, so it seemed pretty in the books. And yeah, the outcome didn't change by much, as both teams only went on to score 3 more points before the game concluded. In this game, you had Trevor Siemian playing quarterback for the New York Jets. He finished with 32 passes for 261 yards, 1 touchdown, and 1 interception. On the other hand, you had the red-hot Joe Flacco playing quarterback for the Cleveland Browns. He finished with 19 passes for 309 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 1 interception. Then, rushing the ball, you had Breece Hall carrying the ball 13 times for 84 yards for the Jets, and for the Browns, you had Jerome Ford getting 12 carries for 64 yards. And in the receiving game, you had Garrett Wilson leading the way for the New York Jets, hauling in 5 passes for 50 yards. And on the Brown side of things, you had David Njoku, the tight end, leading the way with 6 catches for 134 yards. Now, in this game, the offensive total output was not that far off. You had the Jets getting 360 yards of offense, whereas the Browns got 428 yards of offense. But the way that they scored the ball was a little bit different. Taking a look at the scoring summary, first you had the Browns scoring a 7-yard touchdown from Jerome Ford to start the game, and then the Jets quickly responded with a 21-yard touchdown from Breece Hall, so the game was tied at 7-7. But this is when things got away from the Jets, because Cleveland would go on to score 3 straight touchdowns after that. You have Kareem Hunt scoring a 7-yard rushing touchdown, which there was the extra point failed, so Cleveland went up 13-7. Then you have Ronnie Hickman getting a 30-yard interception return for a touchdown. So then the Browns went up 20-7. And then Elijah Moore caught an 8-yard touchdown pass from Joe Flacco. So the Browns were suddenly up 27-7. So at this point, things weren't looking that good for the Jets, but they managed to get a pick 6 as well. Jermaine Johnson hauled in a 37-yard interception return. So with 2 minutes left to play in the first half, the Jets were kind of crawling back into it. It was 27-14. But then Jerome Ford got a 50-yard pass from Joe Flacco, and so the Browns went up 34-14. And to end the half, Greg Zuerlein was able to hit a 46-yard field goal. So going into halftime, as I said, it was 34-17 with the Browns leading. And then in the fourth quarter, both kickers were able to kick a field goal, and that was the final margin. So both teams were able to score a defensive touchdown in this game. And taking a look at the offensive stats from it, you had the Browns having 301 yards through the air, whereas the Jets had 253. The Browns had 127 yards on the ground, whereas the Jets had 107. So offensively, the disparity isn't that large. The biggest difference is where they were getting the yardage and what was being taken away from them. Starting off, you have penalties. Penalties were a huge factor disrupting the Jets' offensive flow in this game. They finished with 12 penalties for a total of minus 74 yards, whereas the Browns only had 4 penalties and they lost 26 yards. So that's almost 50 yards right there wiped off the board for the Jets from their own mistakes. Then lost and 1 interception. So, that is good for the Jets, It's not often that you lose games and win the turnover battle, so a bit unfortunate there. And even in the sack battle, it wasn't a huge difference. The Jets only allowed 2 sacks to Trevor Siemian, whereas the Browns allowed 1 sack to Joe Flacco, so not a big difference there. But red zone efficiency was key in this game. The Jets simply were not able to get into the red zone that often. They made it into the red zone 1 time in this entire game, and they weren't able to come away with a touchdown in that drive, so that went 0 for 1. The Browns, on the other hand, were able to get to the red zone with relative ease. They made it 5 times, and they were able to convert 3 of those into touchdowns. So, being able to hammer it home when it mattered, definitely there was an advantage to the Browns on that part of the game. So, yeah, taking a look at all of these, there's not much left for each team to do. After this game, New York sits at a record of 6-10, whereas the Browns sit at a record of 11-5. I'm not fully aware of if either team can do anything to benefit themselves. I know that the Jets, they could potentially, they're playing for pride. They haven't beat the Patriots since 2015. Their last matchup is against the Patriots, so they'll probably be gunning for a victory there. But they could also be trying to play spoiler just because the Patriots don't have, they're not that great. If the Patriots get a victory, then the Jets' draft position improves and the Patriots' draft position gets worse. So it's more about, but I don't think anyone really plays like that. The Jets obviously aren't tanking this year, and I don't think moving from the 12th to the 11th spot is going to do anything from them. So they will most likely be trying to win that game. The Browns, they are having a phenomenal season, but they cannot catch up to the Ravens in terms of divisional standings. So this is for sure a wildcard team, and I don't think that any other wildcard team can really take this from them. So I'm pretty sure they're solidified as the 5 seed no matter what. So, yeah. Then, moving into Saturday Night Football, you have a very controversial matchup between the Detroit Lions and the Dallas Cowboys. The Lions entered this game with a record of 11-4, and the Cowboys entered this game with a record of 10-5. So these are 2 very high-caliber NFC juggernauts that are matching up with a lot on the line. The Cowboys enter this game with still a little bit of a possibility that they could jump over the Eagles and reclaim the number 1 position in the NFC East, whereas the Lions, although they can't finish any worse than the 3rd seed, they potentially could take the 1 seed from the 49ers with a victory and some other things at play. So both teams have a lot to play for, and this is a good playoff meter to see how your team is going to do, because this is likely a team that you might end up seeing. One important thing to note is that the Cowboys entering this game was played in Dallas, by the way, they had been 7-0, they had not lost at home, and they managed to keep that streak alive by winning this game with a final score of 20-19. Now, there were some very big performances in this game, but not many people are talking about that as much as the ending. But before we get into the ending, I do want to take you through what some of the stats and what the play-by-play of the game was leading up to the end. So, in this game, you had Jared Goff completing 19 passes for 271 yards, 1 touchdown, and 2 interceptions. Then you had Dak Prescott, on the other hand, completing 26 passes for 345 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 1 interception. Rushing the ball, the Lions were led by David Montgomery, who had 14 carries for 65 yards, topped off with a touchdown. And the Cowboys, on the other hand, had Tony Pollard leading the way for them. He finished with 16 carries for only 49 yards. And then in the receiving game, Amon-Ra St. Brown had yet another nice day for the Lions, finishing with 6 catches for 90 yards and 1 touchdown. Unfortunately, this is nowhere near the type of day that CeeDee Lamb had, who put up unbelievable numbers in this game. He finished with 13 catches franchise record in both receptions and receiving yards. So, very, very big day for them. Along with this, at halftime, Jimmy Johnson was inducted into the Dallas Cowboys Hall of Fame or Ring of Honor. One of the other, but a very big and momentous day for the Cowboys. But right now, all anyone can talk about is the 2-point conversion that ended this game. So, in order to understand what was at stake, I have to take you through how this game truly played out. So, this game started with a Lions field goal. So, the Lions went up 3-0. After that, the Cowboys were very quickly intercepted, but the Lions weren't able to do anything with this gift. So, the Cowboys were lucky, and the Lions were forced to punt. After that, the Cowboys got the ball very deep in their own territory, and it looked like they were about to take a sack in the end zone, and the Lions would have gotten a safety. That would have put the Lions up 5-0 in this game. Dak Prescott impressively somehow maneuvered this, and he found his way outside of the end zone, and he threw a long shot to CeeDee Lamb. CeeDee Lamb was then hit in the stride and was able to gallop his way into the end zone for a touchdown. So what looked like it was going to be a safety for the Lions turned into a 92-yard touchdown pass from Dak Prescott to CeeDee Lamb, and it put the Cowboys up 7-3. The rest of the first half was pretty sloppy, very defensively minded game. Neither team would score again before halftime. The Lions would get intercepted at one point, and immediately after their interception, Dallas would fumble it, and then the Lions would get the ball, and they would go pretty far with it, but then they would lose. They'd lose possession on a turnover on downs, and then both teams punted. So you enter halftime, and the game is 7-3, which is pretty surprising considering Dallas is, they're averaging 40 points a game at home, and Detroit, on the other hand, just has a very high-powered offense. And so you head into the third quarter, and Detroit is finally able to respond. They score a touchdown, and then the Cowboys respond with a field goal. So you go into the fourth quarter with the game tied, finally, at a score of 10-10. Not what anyone was expecting, I don't think, but it's been a great defensive battle. Aiden Hutchinson has been sacking Dak Prescott multiple times, and Micah Parsons has been involved in almost every defensive stop for the Cowboys. So both the defensive stars are showing out in this game. Then, in the fourth quarter, the Lions were the first to score. They scored a field goal, and then Dallas soon after was able to respond with a touchdown of their own. That put the Cowboys up 17-13. And then, let me just change views real quick. After that, after that, the Lions were given the ball. They had a 3-and-out. They couldn't do anything with it. Gave the ball back to the Cowboys. The Cowboys held on for a little bit, 7 plays. They were able to take 3 minutes off the clock, but they could not do very much, and they had to punt once again. Then, at this point, the Lions were handed the ball with 2.5 minutes left in the game, and I think they had a decent number of their timeouts left. So, it looked like this was where the Lions' comeback effort would have to be. Down 4 points, you get a touchdown, you go up by 3. Would have put them in a good position. But instead, Jared Goff goes out there, and he immediately throws a interception. So, yeah, obviously the Cowboys take over. They can't do very much at all. They're immediately stymied by this Detroit Lions defense, but unfortunately they were in field goal range. So, Detroit is doing everything they can to stop the clock, and they succeed. And so Dallas kicks a field goal, and now they're up by 7 points, and there's 1 minute and 41 seconds left in this game. So Detroit receives the ball, 1 minute and 41 seconds, no timeouts, and they put together a magnificent drive. They go down the field, and with 23 seconds left in the game, Jared Goff delivers a touchdown strike to Amon-Ra St. Brown. So now, obviously, the score is 19 Lions to 20 Cowboys. And the Lions have a decision to make at this point. They can go for the extra point and tie up the game, which will most likely send the game in overtime. Or they can put it all on the line and go for a 2-point conversion, in which, if they succeed, they will go up 21-20 and most likely win the game. Dan Campbell opts to go for 2. Apparently this had been the plan all along. The broadcasters knew, everyone knew that the Lions were going to go for 2. So, they put other personnel out on the field. They try it once, but the play is immediately whistled dead because the Cowboys took a timeout. Then, they run the play. You have number 68, which is Decker of the Lions. He's an offensive lineman. He runs a route off the left side of the offensive line. Jared Goff throws the ball to him. He catches it. And the Lions convert the 2-point conversion. So Lions fans are roaring. Everyone on the Lions sideline is celebrating. And Cowboys stands. They're all stunned. And so the energy is out in this arena. Everyone is quiet. But then there's a flag. And the referees rule that number 68 of the Lions, Decker, actually did not report as eligible for this play. So therefore, the Lions are penalized with illegal touching. He should not have been able to touch the ball or catch it. And the 2-point conversion is no good. But because of the penalty, they will be given another chance. The Lions immediately are furious by this. Because the referees had ruled that actually number 70 of the Lions on the offensive line, on the lineup on the other side, was the one that reported as eligible, and number 68 made no attempt to report as eligible. The Lions are profusely refuting this. Number 70 is screaming his face off. Dan Campbell is out of his mind, angry, and in all of this, the Lions decide that they are still going to go for it, even having incurred a 5-yard penalty. So now they're going for a 2-point conversion at the 7-yard line, which is honestly a questionable call. Obviously, something seemed wrong. The Lions did not seem to agree with the fact that 68 was called as ineligible. It seemed like they all believed that he had reported, but they decided to go for it again anyways. Jared Goff threw a pass this time that was intercepted, but there was a penalty on the Cowboys because Micah Parsons had a neutral zone infraction, so half the distance to the goal. Now the Lions got to try once again at the 3.5-yard line, and this time Jared Goff threw the pass to, what's his name? Jay Mitchell. Yeah, I don't know, some guy, maybe a tight end, some nobody on the Lions offense, and the pass was a little bit too low, and the Lions were not able to convert it. So Dallas is very happy by this. They are able to celebrate and be victorious. Obviously, the Lions aren't going to win this game, and everyone is basically upset. In the post-game interview, Dan Campbell says that he had prepped the referees for this, saying that they were going to run this play. He had told them that 68 was the one that was supposed to be eligible, but what he was told by the referees was that 70 reported, 68 did not, and that's why they received the penalty. Jared Goff said that in his conversation with his offensive lineman, number 70 said that he did not report as eligible, and number 68 definitely said that he did, and so he claims that the referees were the ones that mixed it up. Now, what happened after this game has drawn a lot of attention. There's video footage of number 68 from the Lions walking to the referees before the play is called and having a conversation. Number 70 at this time is running onto the field and nowhere near the referee. On top of that, Brad Allen, the lead officiant of this game, and his entire crew has been taken out of playoff games. The NFL has not said explicitly that the crew messed up the Lions' call on that 2-point attempt, But based on that decision, I think we can all reasonably assume that the referees botched this game, that number 68 Decker of the Lions did actually report and number 70 did not, and that the referees messed this up. I feel like this is true. I have no reason to believe that the Lions are lying. And yeah, I think that the referees cost us a great game. But does this mean that the Lions would have automatically won the game? No. I feel bad for the penalty yardage that the Lions had to suffer, because I think they were penalized incorrectly. But the Lions still had mistakes. What really should have happened was, if the Lions got this correct and the referees messed up, they did announce it to the entire stadium. They did say number 70 is the eligible receiver, and this obviously changes everything, because the Cowboys are thus preparing to cover 70. They don't know that 68 is eligible because it was reported wrong. So how can they properly defensively scheme? So that play really never would have counted, because if the referees had gotten it right, they would have said 68 is eligible. Then the Cowboys would have put a man on him to cover him, so we don't know how that play really would have played out. But nonetheless, that moment is robbed. The game was not allowed to be decided on the field because the referees got the call wrong, and based on their wrong call, the Lions were sent back 5 yards, which they never should have been. It should have been a 2-yard attempt for a 2-point conversion, and we should have seen if they were able to do it or not. Obviously, it's not a given. I don't think that the Lions for sure get that. I think that the Cowboys' defense is very capable, and they would have been able to stop it. And I think from the 2-yard line, the Lions had a hell of a more shot than like from the 3.5 or the 7-yard line. But also, you need to have situational awareness. Dan Campbell, I get that he wanted to win this game and all of that, but after suffering a 5-yard penalty, even if it is like the referee's fault and you didn't do anything wrong, from the 7-yard line, you're really gonna risk your shot at the 1 seed like this. Why not go for the extra point? If you go for the extra point, at least there's hope that you can maybe receive the onside, or not the onside, receive the coin flip, win the coin flip and receive the ball in overtime, because the game's gonna go to overtime. Your defense has been playing great all game. Even if you don't get it, I think that you can get a stop on the Cowboys. Have some faith in your guys. I know that the Lions, like, when you think of them, you're thinking of their offense at this time, but really putting the rest of the season on the line of a 7-point 2-point conversion attempt is, a 7-yard 2-point conversion attempt is frankly a little bit silly. Now, they have every reason to be mad at the officials in this game, but that decision, it does come down to you. And since number 70 had been announced as eligible prior to the play, it is on the Lions coaching staff to recognize that and then get the referee's attention to be like, hey, no, that is wrong. That is not the guy. And yeah, there is audio, evidence of number 70 being announced as eligible. So, while the referees did mess up, there is certain accountability that the Lions have to take in their loss in this matchup. So, obviously, a disappointing loss for them. Very happy victory for the Cowboys. They benefit from this. I can understand Lions coaching staff, Lion players, and Lions fans' outrage at what happened in this game. It is truly an unfortunate situation, but I think other things could have been done to adapt to the situation better. Obviously, you don't want to be screwed late in the season like that, and I feel for you. I understand the outrage, but it wasn't necessarily the end of the world. Other things could have been done, and at least on the bright side, the referees are not going to be seen in the playoffs, so I think everyone wins off that decision. But yeah, that is why there was so much controversy at the ending of the Lions-Cowboys game, and how Dallas was able to come away with a 1-point victory. But yeah, after that, we move into the Sunday morning slate. So first up, you matchup between the New England Patriots and the Buffalo Bills. The Patriots would lose this matchup by only 6 points. Buffalo won 27-21 in this game. You have Bailey Zapp completing 16 passes for 209 yards and 3 interceptions. Josh Allen, on the other hand, completed 15 passes for only 169 yards and 1 interception. Then rushing the ball, you have Ezekiel Elliott carrying the ball 14 times for 39 yards and 1 touchdown. Whereas for the Bills, you have James Cook carrying the ball 16 times for 48 yards. And then in the receiving game, Kevin Harris was the leading receiver for the Patriots. He had 2 catches for 54 yards. And for the Bills, you had Dalton Kincaid leading the way with 4 catches for 87 yards. Let's go through the play-by-play. Actually, let's go over the offensive stats in this game first. New England actually outgained Buffalo in this matchup. New England had 294 offensive yards, whereas Buffalo only had 281. But the big kicker here is New England turned the ball over 4 times, whereas Buffalo only turned it over once. Looking at a breakdown of the passing, the Patriots had 191 yards passing, and the Bills had 154. Rushing the ball, it was a slight advantage to the Bills, with the Patriots rushing for 103 yards and the Bills rushing for 127. Penalties were not that big of a factor in this matchup, with the Patriots receiving 2 penalties for 20 yards and the Bills receiving 4 for 32. But, turnovers were huge. The Patriots threw 3 interceptions and lost a fumble, whereas the Bills only threw 1 interception. And sack-wise, the Patriots allowed 3 sacks, whereas the Bills allowed 1. So, looking at the play-by-play, it's quite funny, in my opinion. You have the Patriots scoring on the opening kickoff. They had a 98-yard kick return, took it to the house, and immediately started off the game up 7-0. Then Buffalo got the ball. They had a 3-and-out, and they gave it back to the Patriots. The Patriots on their first play throw an interception. And after that, their defense holds up very well, and they only allow a field goal to the Bills. So they still lead 7-3. The Patriots get the ball, and they have a 3-and-out. So they give the ball back to Buffalo. Buffalo does nothing with it. Run 5 plays for 11 yards, and then they have to punt. Then the Patriots, after getting the ball yet again, throw an interception. This time, their defense can only do so much. It was too close, and so Buffalo this time is able to score a touchdown and finally take the lead with a score of 10-7. The Patriots get the ball back, and they immediately turn it over once again. Bailey Zapp completes a pass to Pharaoh Brown, and Pharaoh Brown, while he's trying to fight for extra yardage, gets stripped and they lose it. Then, yet again, the Patriots defense stands tall and limits the Buffalo offense to just a field goal. So, they're being gifted with amazing field positioning, but the Patriots defense is constantly able to just stop them. They kick a field goal and they take the lead 13-7. Then the Patriots get the ball back. They lose yardage and then punt. Buffalo gets the ball. They also have a 3-and-out and punt. And then Bailey Zapp throws a pick 6. So, as good as the defense is playing, our offense is just giving Buffalo the time of their lives. So, Buffalo takes the lead 20-7. After that, the Patriots get the ball once again, and they were actually able to do something with it this time. They go down the field, they score a touchdown, and now the score is 14-20 in favor of Buffalo. The Bills get the ball, they do a little bit with it, and then Josh Allen throws an interception, which is great for the Patriots. They get the ball, they lead a solid drive down the field, and then they miss the field goal. Chad Ryland has missed the most field goals of anyone in the league. He obviously had the great one to end the game against the Broncos, but he misses this, and so the Bills get the ball. They get yet another 3-and-out, and the Patriots, they have elected to do nothing with the time remaining. So the game goes into halftime with a score of 14-20 in favor of the Bills. Then on the opening kickoff of the second half, the Bills get the ball. They drive down the field. They score a touchdown. Buffalo goes up 27-14. Then Patriots punt. Then Bills punt. Then Patriots score a touchdown. So now the game is 21-27. Then two more punts are exchanged. And Buffalo is finally able to kill the last 5 minutes of the clock with their offense and just nail it for the win. What is surprising about this game is I think right before one of the last Patriots punts was another field goal attempt from Chad Ryland. He botched it again, and there was a delay of game penalty, so it didn't matter. They ended up getting pushed back 5 yards, but this guy really can't consistently make anything. He missed 2 kicks in this game, and those 2 kicks would have tied the game, realistically speaking. And what was most surprising was, even though the Patriots gave away the ball 4 times in the first half, it was only a 6-point game going into halftime, and the Bills' offense looked pretty bad. Like, 27 points, 7 of those were scored directly from their defense, so they were really limited. They were given amazing field position time and time again, and they couldn't capitalize on it. Josh Allen didn't have a good game at all. Ran the ball for a touchdown. He scored with his feet twice. But he just had some boneheaded plays, and he did not look very good. So if I'm the Bills, obviously I'm glad that I walk away with the victory. But it was not a strong one. It was definitely not a resilient victory. Like, they didn't look good, in my opinion. But the Bills, they have a chance to play for the head of the division going into Week 18. It's a game between the Bills and the Dolphins, and it's winner take all. Buffalo actually sits in a very weird position where they can win the division with a victory over the Dolphins, but if they lose and a lot of other things happen, they can be completely eliminated from the playoff picture as a whole. So, a lot to play for the Bills. And the Patriots, on the other hand, they go against the Jets next week, and they have beat the Jets consistently since 2015. I think it's like 16 straight matchups beating the Jets. So, even though they sit at 4-12 and their draft position would fall from like 3rd to something worse, actually, are they even 3rd? They might be 2nd. They have a pretty good draft spot. That record is pretty nice, and I do anticipate them winning and trying to win in the game next week. Honestly, if they could have, they would have beaten the Bills. They just had too many mistakes. But yeah, both teams move forward, and I'm sure neither team is too unhappy with the outcome. After that, you move into the Falcons and Bears matchup. Chicago would win this game 37-17. Wasn't particularly close. Tyler Heineke finished this game with 10 passes completed for 163 yards, 1 touchdown, and 3 interceptions. Justin Fields, on the other hand, had a pretty nice day, completing 20 passes for 268 yards and a touchdown. Bijan Robinson had 15 carries for 75 yards, and for the Bears, you had Khalil Herbert rushing 18 times for 124 yards and a touchdown. Receiving the ball, Tyler Algier had 1 catch for 75 yards and a touchdown, and DJ Moore had an amazing day with 9 catches for 159 yards and a score. Taking a look at the total offense, Chicago led the way by quite a bit. They had 432 yards of offensive output, whereas the Falcons only had 307. The turnover margin was quite drastic in this one. You have the Atlanta Falcons turning the ball over 4 times, and the Bears turning it over 0 times. Taking a look at the offensive breakdown, the Bears dominated on both sides. Passing the ball, Chicago had 240 yards to the 173 of the Falcons, and Chicago also had 292 yards on the ground to the 134 of the Falcons. Then, taking a look at the sack battle, it was relatively close. The Falcons allowed 2 sacks, whereas the Bears allowed 3. But red zone, this was pretty key in this matchup as well. The Falcons only made it to the red zone 1 time, and they couldn't convert in that 1 attempt, whereas the Bears made it 5 times, and they scored touchdowns on 4 of those drives. So, obviously, red zone efficiency and turnovers was pretty critical in this game. Even though the Bears suffered a lot more lost yardage to penalties, it didn't really matter because they were doing everything else so well. So, honestly, very nice performance from the Bears. They somehow enter week 18 not being eliminated from the postseason, which is pretty surprising the way that their season has gone. It's a bunch of random shenanigans, I think. At least there was, at some point in week 17, they weren't eliminated. I think they still have some way of making it, but I could be incorrect. But yeah, even with where they are right now, it's honestly pretty good. This is good progress. Justin Fields looks pretty nice. The connection with DJ Moore is top-notch, and the haul that they got from the Panthers was amazing. And so, even if they trade back just a few spots to get Marvin Harrison Jr., they could get yet another nice haul and be in a pretty good position for the future. This is the type of progress that you wanted to see the team make. So, with a win or a loss next week, it doesn't really matter. You got 7 wins on the year, which is a good improvement. And the Falcons, on the other hand, they desperately need a quarterback. Heineke and Desmond Ridder, they're both bums. They have, I think I saw combined, they have way more interceptions than they do touchdowns, which is not a good stat at all. So yeah, the Falcons, they have great offensive pieces, but they're being limited by lousy quarterback play and poor offensive scheming from Arthur Smith. So they need to figure out their offense. But yeah, moving into the next game, you have the Raiders facing off against the Colts. This game had a relatively close finish, with the Colts finally winning with a score of 23-20. In this game, Aiden O'Connell finished with 30 passes for 299 yards and 2 touchdowns, which is a pretty nice day. And Gardner Minshew had 15 passes for 224 yards and a touchdown. Zamir White got the start once again for an injured Josh Jacobs, so he had 20 carries for 71 yards. And Jonathan Taylor got 21 carries for 96 yards and a score. Devontae Adams had the opposite of his previous output. He had a very productive day in this one. 13 catches for 126 yards and 2 touchdowns. I think that's one of his best performances of the year. And for the Colts, Alec Pierce led the way, surprisingly, with 1 catch for 58 yards and a touchdown. Taking a look at offensive production in this game, it was pretty close, with the Raiders actually winning it. They had 370 total yards to the 349 of the Colts. Breaking that down, 286 yards of passing for the Raiders versus 215 for the Colts. But on the ground, the Colts led by a good amount. The Raiders had 84 yards rushing, whereas the Colts had 134. Then, looking at their red zone trips, the Raiders were actually more efficient. They went 2 of 3 on their red zone attempts, whereas the Colts went 1 of 3. And there are no turnovers in this game. Sack-wise, it was also pretty close. The Raiders only let up 2 sacks, whereas the Colts allowed 1 sack. But penalties, I guess penalties is the biggest difference in this matchup, which makes sense because it was only a 3-point difference by the end of it. So it makes sense that there wasn't a huge disparity in the stats. The Raiders had 7 penalties versus the Colts had 5. So really, that's all it comes down to. The Raiders, I think, are out of the playoff picture with that loss, which is fine. They were a rebuilding team. Whoever, if they happened to make it to the playoffs, they would have gotten stomped anyways. So it doesn't really matter. But they've shown a lot of resilience in this very trying season, and they put up a good game against a team that probably will go to the playoffs, with the Colts now being at 9-7. Very surprising season for the Colts, considering all that has happened. I can't believe that they're in the position that they are, but they have the ability to go to the playoffs against the Texans next week. I think both teams are at 9-7, so it's a win-and-in situation, I believe. Then moving into the next matchup, you have the Los Angeles Rams traveling to New York to play against the Giants. The Rams would win this game with a very slim margin of 26-25. In this game, you have Matthew Stafford completing 24 passes for 317 yards, 1 touchdown, and 2 interceptions, so not the best. And New York started Tyrod Taylor for this one. He had 319 yards, 1 touchdown, and 1 interception, so not a bad day for Tyrod. Then rushing the ball, Kyren Williams had a very productive day. He had 20 carries for 87 yards and 3 touchdowns, whereas the leading rusher for the Giants was actually none other than Tyrod Taylor himself. He had 6 carries for 40 yards. Receiving the ball, you had another productive day from Buccaneers, who is inching ever so close to that rookie receiving yard record. He had 5 catches for 118 yards. And Darius Slayton was the lead receiver for the Giants with 4 catches for 106 yards and a touchdown. Looking at the offensive output for these teams, it was almost dead even. The Rams getting 391 yards of offense and the Giants getting 389, so a difference of only 2 yards, which makes sense because this game was decided by 1 point. The Rams actually lost this turnover battle quite badly, giving up 3 turnovers to the 1 of the Giants. New York was able to capitalize off of one of those, I believe. Where is it? New York. Okay, I guess it wasn't off of a turnover, but they had a 94-yard punt return for a touchdown in this game. Oh my goodness, I guess they went for the same thing as the Lions. I hadn't watched this game, I didn't really pay attention to it at all, but with 3 minutes left in the game, Gunnar Olszewski was able to haul in a 94-yard punt return to the house, and that brought the score to 26-25, and then New York also decided to go for a 2-point attempt rather than tie it up and go into overtime, and they failed the 2-point conversion, and so they lost the game by 1 point. So 2 1-point matchups in this week that are decided by a failed 2-point attempt. It's gutsy play calling, and you pay for it. You definitely do pay for it. Passing the ball, very close, 286 to 284. The Rams led by 2 yards. Rushing the ball, both teams had the exact same amount of rushing yards. Sacks, New York allowed 6 sacks. The Rams only allowed 4. Penalties, the Giants had 7 and lost 65 yards. The Rams had 3 and lost 28. So I'm guessing between the sacks and the penalties, they were able to make up for the turnover difference. But yeah, the Rams escape with victory, and they clinch a playoff spot. So very good news and week for them. Then, moving into the next matchup, you have the Arizona Cardinals defeating the Philadelphia Eagles with a final score of 35-31. This is an inexplicable meltdown by the Eagles. Going into halftime, the Eagles were up 21-6. In the second half of this game, the Cardinals scored 29 points, and the Eagles only scored 10. So, a huge choke job by the Eagles. Looking at the stats in this game, Kyler Murray had 25 passes for 232 yards, 3 touchdowns, and an interception. Jalen Hurts, on the other hand, threw 18 passes for only 167 yards, 3 touchdowns, but also an interception. Then rushing the ball, James Conner had a turn back the clock kind of game, 26 carries for 128 yards and a score, whereas DeAndre Swift had 13 carries for 61 yards. And then receiving, Greg Dortch led the way for the Cardinals with 7 catches for 82 yards, and A.J. Brown was the leading receiver for the Eagles with 4 catches for 53 yards. Offensively, it was not even close. The Cardinals had 449 yards of offense, and the Eagles had 275, which is quite bad. Then turnovers, both teams had 1 turnover. The Cardinals held the ball for 39 minutes and 39 seconds in this game to the 20 minutes of the Eagles. And that too, Philadelphia benefited from a defensive score in this game. Who was it? Who scored for them? It was Sidney Brown. Sidney Brown had a 99-yard interception return to start the second quarter. And so, yeah, that was 1 yard that the Cardinals were, if they say that they managed to score that, they would have had 7 points there. So the Cardinals really almost scored 42 points and beat the Eagles 42-24. Yeah, horrible game if you're the Eagles. You really choked everything away. You had a lead on the Cowboys for the division. Now, with this loss, you lose your ability to control your own destiny, because now if the Cowboys win against the Commanders next week, the Cowboys will be the 1 seed of the NFC East, and the Eagles drop to a wild card spot. So really a lot was riding on this game, and it was so easy. The Cardinals are one of the worst teams in the NFL, sitting at a record of 4-12, and you allow them to score 35 points and steal a victory. Truly just awful. Yeah, taking a look, I mean, obviously the stats don't even really matter. It's more the outcome in this one. But yeah, Arizona had 228 passing yards to the 184 of the Eagles rushing the ball. The Eagles got destroyed. Arizona rushed the ball for 221 yards in this game, while Philly was only able to rush for 91 yards. Yeah, Arizona went 4 of 6 on red zone attempts. They made it to the red zone 6 times in this game. Defense was just giving them whatever. And then the Eagles, offensively, they were efficient. They only made it to the red zone twice, but they converted on both of those. Penalties, it was pretty close. The Cardinals had 5 penalties. The Eagles only had 4. Turnovers, it was the same with 1 interception thrown each. And sack-wise, Cardinals allowed 1 sack, whereas the Eagles allowed 0. So, goodness gracious, like, Eagles, what is going on? I don't know, a team that started so strong has really had a second half meltdown, and they've got to figure it out, because this is a bad look for the Eagles. They have now lost like 4 of their last 5. They were the 1 seed, the clear 1 seed for a while, and now they have dropped into 5th place. Obviously the record isn't that bad, but you have to be worried. There's obviously cause for concern. They could just lose to anyone if they can lose to the Cardinals, so they have to figure it out, and they only have 1 week to do so, really. But yeah, props to the Cardinals. Way to go out there and compete and play spoiler. Kyler Murray had a very nice game, so good job to the Cards. Then, going to the next game, you have the New Orleans Saints defeating the Tampa Bay Buccaneers 23-13. Baker Mayfield kind of lost his great December run. He was playing lights out before this, and he had an okay game. Derek Carr completed 24 passes for 197 yards and 2 touchdowns in this game, whereas Mayfield had 309 yards, 2 touchdowns, but also 2 interceptions. Jamal Williams got the most rushing yards for the Saints in this one. He had 19 carries for 58 yards, whereas Rashad White had 11 carries for 42 yards. Juwan Johnson led the way in receiving for the Saints with 8 catches for 90 yards and a touchdown. And I'm guessing it's receiver for the Buccaneers with 4 catches for 84 yards and a touchdown. In this game, Tampa Bay was better on offense, actually, with 349 total yards to 310 of the Saints. But Tampa Bay turned the ball over 4 times, and the Saints didn't turn it over at all. So that's really the key difference. 2 fumbles lost and 2 interceptions thrown. It's very hard to win games putting up numbers like that, so they've just got to clean up their offense. Passing the ball, the Buccaneers did have an advantage. Rushing the ball, they had a bad day. Only 57 yards on the ground. The Saints, they win a very important one to stay in playoff contention. This entire division is so silly, you know. You're entering week 18 with 2 teams at 8-8 tied for number 1 in the division. Yeah, it's really anyone's. It just depends on who wins next week and who doesn't. If the Buccaneers lose and the Saints win, then the Saints win the division. Vice versa. I think Tampa Bay maybe owns the tiebreaker, but I'm not 100% sure. I don't know. But yeah, it's truly is anyone's division. What would be really interesting is if both teams lost and fell to 8-9, and then the Falcons won and got to 8-9. I wonder who wins the tiebreaker in that case. But yeah, this division is lousy. It's kind of crazy. But the Buccaneers had a solid chance to put things away in this one, and the Saints said no. So congrats to the Saints on denying that opportunity to the Bucs. You keep your season alive, and yeah, very interesting to see what will happen next week. Tampa Bay gets to play against Carolina, which should be a victory for them, and New Orleans gets to play against Atlanta. So very important divisional matchups in the next week for these 2 teams, and we'll see what happens. Then we move into the 49ers and Commanders game. 49ers won this game 27-10. Not particularly close. You had Sam Howell early in the week getting benched and then being unbenched. Kind of weird. Brock Purdy would finish this game with 22 completions for 230 yards and 2 touchdowns. Sam Howell would finish the game with 17 passes for 169 yards, 1 touchdown, and 2 interceptions. You had Christian McCaffrey leaving the game with a calf strain or calf injury, so Elijah Mitchell was the leading rusher for the Niners with 17 carries for 80 yards and a touchdown. And then Brian Robinson was the leading rusher for the Commanders with 9 carries for 44 yards. Brandon Ayuk led the way for the 49ers with 7 catches for 114 yards and a touchdown. And Terry McLaurin led the way for the Commanders with 4 catches for 61 yards and a touchdown for the Commanders. In this game, the 49ers dominated on offense. They had 408 yards of offense, whereas the Commanders had 225. The Commanders also turned the ball over twice, which was not good for them. And the time of possession was very largely different, where the 49ers holding the ball for 38 minutes and the Commanders holding it for 22. Penalties were also bad for the Commanders. They suffered 5 penalties for 40 yards loss, whereas the 49ers had 3 penalties for 20 yards loss. The 49ers were able to make the red zone very easily, but they only converted half of those. There were 3 of 6 on the red zone attempts, whereas the Commanders were 1 of 2. Both teams only allowed 1 sack to their quarterbacks, which is pretty good. But yeah, passing the ball, the Niners had 224 yards to 163 of the Commanders, but rushing the ball, the Niners had 184 rushing yards, and the Commanders only had 62. So the ground game was strong for San Francisco, and it was not for Washington. And yeah, it's a 17-point loss, so obviously a lot needs to be done for the Commanders to do better. There's no point in doing better at this point of the season. They're 4-12. A loss next week ensures them a better draft spot, I'm pretty sure. So yeah, may as well just tank the last game. Who does Washington even play? I'm not sure. But 49ers, basically with the Eagles' loss, they clinch the number 1 position in the NFC, so they don't have to try next week. They get to play against the Rams. The Rams have also clinched, so both teams realistically could rest, but I think that the Rams can still improve their position in the wildcard seedings, so they have something to play for, whereas the 49ers, I don't think they want to risk any injury, especially with Christian McCaffrey getting that calf injury. It might be a sign for them to just give all their players a break. So, yeah. Then moving into the Panthers and Jaguars game. Panthers got shut out for the first time in many, many years. The Jaguars won this game 26-0. Bryce Young finished this game with 19 passes for 112 yards and an interception. And C.J. Beathard was the starting quarterback for the Jaguars, but he did just fine. He finished with 17 passes for 178 yards. Kind of funny. C.J. Beathard was able to lead the shutout. Then rushing the ball, Chuba Hubbard had 11 carries for 45 yards, and Travis Etienne Jr. had 16 carries for 102 yards and 2 touchdowns. Then in the receiving game, Adam Thielen was the leading receiver for the Panthers with 6 catches for 38 yards, and Evan Engram finished with 6 catches for 60 yards for the Jaguars. Carolina had an abysmal day on offense, putting up only 124 total yards of offense, whereas the Jaguars didn't have a great game, but they didn't need it with 317 total yards of offense. The Panthers also had 1 turnover, and the Jaguars had 0. In this game, after the sacks, Carolina only had 67 yards through the air, whereas Jacksonville had 162 yards. And yeah, that's because of all the sacks. Carolina allowed 6 sacks for 45 yards in this game, whereas the Jaguars only allowed 3 sacks. Rushing the ball, there was also a pretty big disparity, with the Panthers only rushing for 57 yards and the Jaguars rushing for 155, so there was almost a 100-yard difference there. The Panthers also suffered 3 penalties, whereas the Jaguars only suffered 1. Yeah, 1 turnover. So, horrible game for the Panthers. Unless they get a lead in the 4th quarter next week, they are going to finish with 0 minutes led in the 4th quarter of any game in the season. So, obviously, that is not a good stat at all. I don't think that this is what they had envisioned for their season whatsoever. And to make things worse, because they traded into the number 1 draft spot, even though they will finish definitively with the worst record in the NFL, the Bears hold their draft position, so they get nothing out of it. Truly rough season for the Panthers. They'll have to get their offensive line better if they want to do anything next year. Bryce Young has looked promising at times. He looked pretty good against the Packers, but this was not a good matchup for him. Then moving into the next game, you had the battle of the top of the AFC, and the Dolphins visiting the Ravens. The Ravens absolutely smacked the Dolphins in this game, winning 56-19. Lamar Jackson, I think, has fully secured the MVP with this performance. He finished with 18 passes for 18 completions for 321 yards and 5 touchdowns. He went 18 of 21, so he had 3 incompletions, but he had 5 touchdowns. He finished with a perfect quarterback rating, 158.3. And I think he joins a list of a very few select guys who have done that 3 times in their career. I think it's game over. Lamar has done it. He's gonna win. Then Tua, on the other hand, completed 22 passes for 237 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. Rushing the ball, Gus Edwards led the way for the Ravens with 16 carries for 68 yards and a touchdown, and Devon Chain had 14 carries for 107 yards. So very efficient day for him yet again. Receiving the ball, Zay Flowers got 3 passes for 106 yards and a touchdown for the Ravens. And for the Dolphins, you had Tyreek Hill getting 6 passes for 76 yards. And there was no Jalen Waddle in this game, so Tyreek received more attention, and even though he got more targets, he wasn't able to capitalize on it. Offensively, Miami had a solid day. They put up 375 yards of total offense, but Baltimore was just killing it with 491 total yards of offense. Miami also had 3 turnovers to the 1 of the Ravens, and yeah, 2 of those were interceptions. 1 was a lost fumble. The Ravens only had a lost fumble. Miami also gave up 3 sacks, and the Ravens only gave up 1. Rushing the ball, the game was very close. Miami rushed for 154 yards. Baltimore rushed for 160, but through the air, Miami had 221 yards, whereas the Ravens had 331. And yeah, it was just a onslaught from the Ravens. 56 points is a ton. Where's the red zone? Yeah. Baltimore went 5 of 5 in the red zone, so that's 35 points right there. And the Dolphins went 2 of 3, which isn't even that bad, but they just couldn't compete in this game. Honestly, it's like 56 points is crazy. I can't lie. And you just have to credit Lamar, basically. He had a spectacular game. He only had 3 incompletions. What can you do at that point? Just ran away with the MVP in this one. So, credit to the Ravens taking down 2 juggernauts in the league in back-to-back weeks. They beat the 49ers handily by 14 points, and then they beat the Dolphins by 47 points. 37 points. So yeah, they've made an embarrassment out of the next 2 best teams in the league, and they look very, very strong. So Ravens, definitely top dogs in the NFL right now. After that, you've got the Titans visiting the Texans. The Titans lost this game. The Texans beat them 26-3. Ryan Tannehill completed 16 passes for 168 yards. C.J. Stroud completed 24 passes for 213 yards and a touchdown. Derrick Henry had 12 carries for only 42 yards in this game, whereas Devin Singletary had a pretty efficient day with 16 carries for 80 yards. Then, DeAndre Hopkins caught 7 passes for 72 yards, and Nico Collins got 7 catches for 80 yards. Tennessee had a pretty bad day offensively, finishing with only 187 yards of offense, whereas the Texans had 312. Tennessee also suffered a turnover, whereas the Texans did not. And the Texans were also able to score on defense and special teams. It seems that they had a 13-yard fumble return in the second quarter. Houston led 3-0, then 10-0, then 17-0, then 20-0. So the game was pretty much over at that point, because the rest of the way through, all Tennessee did was score 1 field goal, and that was it. So, Tennessee, to be honest, I have no idea why they're playing Ryan Tannehill at all. That guy is doing nothing for them. His time is done. Give Will Levis the ball once again. Let him do his thing. Trade Tannehill, cut Tannehill. I don't know what you need to do, but the offense can't function under him. And for the Texans, they're having a surprisingly great season. 9-7. They lock up their first winning record since 2019. Their rebuild is looking strong. They get to go against Indianapolis next week and fight for a chance at the playoffs. And yeah, who would have guessed that they would be doing that in week 18? So, great season from them. After after that, you've got the Pittsburgh Steelers defeating the Seattle Seahawks with a final score of 30-23. Mason Rudolph, man, he's doing crazy things for these Steelers. He finishes with 18 passes for 274 yards, whereas Geno Smith had 23 completions for 290 yards and a touchdown. Rushing the ball, Najee had 27 carries for 122 yards and 2 touchdowns, so very productive day, whereas Kenneth Walker had only 10 carries for 53 yards and a touchdown. George Pickens had yet another large day. He had 7 catches for 131 yards, and DK Metcalf had 5 catches for 106 yards. Pittsburgh offense, they are free of the Matt Canada curse, and honestly, they're doing pretty well without Kenny Pickett. Now that Mason Rudolph is under center, they finished with 468 yards of offense, which is crazy. And Seattle finishes with 369. Seattle also had more turnovers, with 1 turnover to the 0 of the Steelers. And the Steelers were good at killing the clock in this game. They held the ball for 37 and a half minutes, and the Seattle Seahawks only had it for 22 and a half. In this game, the Steelers had 266 passing yards, whereas the Seahawks had 281, so pretty close. But running the ball, the Steelers had their way in this one. They got 202 yards on the ground, whereas the Seahawks only got 88. So that is where a majority of the game was decided, on the ground. Also, the 1 fumble lost by the Seahawks. The Seahawks also had 4 penalties to the 2 of the Steelers. The Steelers made the red zone 7 times in this game, and they only got touchdowns in 3 of those attempts, but 7 times, that is unbelievable. The Seahawks went 2 of 3, so they did solid. They just couldn't match the pace of the Steelers in this game. And sack-wise, both teams only allowed 1 sack, so yeah, that Seahawks rushing defense was non-existent in this one. Mike Tomlin keeps his streak of winning seasons alive. Who would have known 2 weeks ago that the key to success was to just put Mason Rudolph in the offense? Honestly, at this point, the Steelers look like they will make the playoffs. I think they make it for sure if they win, but there's also a possibility that they can make it without winning, which is kind of funny. They play the Bengals next week, and so yeah, they're in an interesting spot. They'll most likely be a playoff team, and even though Kenny Pickett is getting healthy, I think honestly you just leave Mason Rudolph in. The offense in the last 2 weeks has been superb. They have been rolling. They scored 30 in back-to-back weeks. So yeah, until he fizzles out, keep Rudolph in the game. He has been doing wonders for this team. And the Seahawks, they fall to 8-8. They would have to get a victory next week to advance to the playoffs, and I think they're definitely still in the picture, but this one hurts for sure. Then moving into the next game, you have a very lousy matchup between the Chargers and the Broncos. The Broncos would win this game 16-9. It's a battle of backup quarterbacks, with Jarrett Stidham getting the start instead of Russell Wilson, after Russell Wilson was benched for financial reasons. A lot of drama surrounding that, actually. You have Russell Wilson being threatened to be benched for the rest of the season after their win over Kansas City back early in the season, or like earlier. They had just beat Kansas City, and then the coaching staff pulled him aside and said, if you don't change your contract to get rid of your injury money guarantee clause, because he has this clause in his contract that says if he doesn't pass his physical, then $37 million is guaranteed to him next year. So yeah, they were like, if you don't change this, we will bench you. And obviously, that's not right. That's not ethical. You signed that contract. You can't just go back on it. And they were in a solid spot. Russell Wilson would go on to win them many more games, lead them to being in the playoff contention, even after their horrible start to the season. He obviously was not the problem, in my opinion. Their roster isn't that great. Their offensive line and some of the receiving receivers, and their defense to start the season was all bad, but he put up solid numbers. So yeah, he played with all of that at stake, and then before entering this game, they made the decision to bench him for financial reasons, and then all of this came out, and Russell Wilson confirmed it. There's also a report that before March 15th, Russell Wilson will be cut from the Broncos. And honestly, Sean Payton, that's horrible, man. How could you do that? That's big credit to Russell Wilson for dealing with this the way that he has. I know that he's gotten a lot of criticism in the last 2 years. He's gotten a lot of shit for his play and for just being corny and things like that, but he has handled the situation with the most integrity and composure that you can have. This is truly baffling, and I don't see how any team is ever going to want to play for the Broncos after all of this has come out. Yeah, that's a disgusting organization. I've never heard of something this low before. But yeah, in this game, Jarrett Stidham had 20 passes for 224 yards and a touchdown. Easton Stick had 24 passes completed for 220 yards. Austin Eckler had 13 carries for 46 yards, and Julian McLaughlin had 8 carries for 44 yards. A. Erickson had 7 catches for 98 yards, and L. Humphrey had 2 catches for 69 yards and a touchdown for the Broncos. Who are these receivers, man? Never heard of these guys, and I just went to the Broncos game. In this game, the Broncos led the offensive production by 12 yards. They had 313 yards of total offense, whereas the Chargers had 301. The Chargers turned the ball over 1 time, and the Broncos turned it over 0 times. The Broncos suffered more penalties in this game, with 7 penalties, whereas the Chargers only had 3. Neither team was able to score in the red zone. In this matchup, the Broncos went 0 of 2, and the Chargers went 0 of 1. Rushing the ball, the Broncos had 101 yards, whereas the Chargers had 86. Passing the ball, it was almost dead even, with the Chargers completing 215 yards through the air, and the Broncos completing 212. The Broncos allowed 2 sacks, and the Chargers only allowed 1. So, yeah, looking at all of this, it really comes down to the turnover. I think that one turnover cost it for the Chargers, because in every other category, they're basically doing better than the Broncos, other than rushing. They're 15 yards short on rushing, but everything else, yeah, just that one thing. But who really cares about this, man? This is such a bum matchup. Let's just move on. After that, you've got the Bengals and the Chiefs. The Bengals were playing for their playoff spot being kept alive. The Chiefs, they beat the Bengals 25-17, and they locked up the AFC West title for the 8th year in a row. In this game, Jake Browning completed 19 passes for 197 yards and a touchdown. Patrick Mahomes completed 21 passes for 245 yards and a touchdown. Joe Mixon carried the ball 21 times for 65 yards, not the most efficient, whereas Isaiah Pacheco carried the ball 18 times for 130 yards, which is very efficient. Jamar Chase had 3 catches for 41 yards, which is pretty not great considering all the smack that he talked about the Chiefs defense last week. On the other hand, you have Rashee Rice catching 5 passes for 127 yards for the Chiefs. In this game, Kansas City was ahead offensively by quite a bit. They had 373 yards of offense, whereas the Bengals had 263. The Chiefs had 1 turnover, and the Bengals had 0. Kind of surprising. In this game, 159 yards through the air for the Bengals, 241 for the Chiefs, then 104 on the ground for the Bengals, and 132 for the Chiefs. So passing the ball was the biggest difference. Chiefs threw for almost 80 more yards. Red zone, actually, the Chiefs were worse. The Bengals were 2 of 4 in the red zone, but the Chiefs were 1 of 3. penalties. They were dead even. But the Bengals allowed Jake Browning to be sacked significantly more. They allowed 6 sacks to him, and the Chiefs only allowed 2 sacks. So that was the biggest difference in the game. Honestly, everything else, the Bengals did fine. The same amount of penalties, better in the red zone, less turnovers, but more sacks. And obviously you're playing against the Chiefs, and they're dynamic. They'll find ways to win. They weren't able to do it against the Raiders, but I guess they were able to do it against the Bengals, which makes sense because they're a great team. But Chiefs, good bounce back victory. They needed that one to get their mental straight, and they move forward as the definitive winner of the, what is this called? AFC West. And the Bengals, they pretty much lose their ability to go to the postseason. As I said, even if they get a win over the Steelers, there's still a chance that they don't make it. So it's not a win-and-in situation, but they can try their best. And finally, we get to the last game of the week. This was the Sunday night matchup between the Green Bay Packers and the Minnesota Vikings. You had the Packers winning this matchup in a blowout victory, 33-10. Jordan Love had a great game. He finished with 24 passes for 256 yards and 3 touchdowns, whereas Nick Mullins had 13 passes for 113 yards and 1 touchdown. I think he entered the game after Jaren Hall was putting up a stinker. Yeah. And so, going back to it, then you had Aaron Jones rushing the ball 20 times for 120 yards, and Ty Chandler rushing the ball 10 times for 40 yards. Then, receiving the ball, you had B. Melton catching 6 passes for 105 yards and a touchdown for the Packers. And for the Vikings, you had 5 catches for 59 yards to Justin Jefferson. Offensively, Green Bay dominated big time. They had 470 yards of offense, whereas Minnesota only had 211. Green Bay did suffer 1 turnover, but the Vikings had 2, so it didn't really matter. And Green Bay held onto the ball for 37 and a half minutes in this one, whereas the Vikings only had it for 22 and a half. Throwing the ball, the Packers had 293 yards to the 144 of the Vikings. Rushing the ball, they rushed it for 177 to the 67 of the Vikings. So just complete dominance on both sides. The Packers did not allow Jordan Love to be sacked even once, whereas the Vikings allowed 4 sacks. In the red zone, the Packers went 2 of 4, whereas the Vikings went 1 of 3. The Vikings also had 6 penalties, whereas the Packers had 4. So, pretty much every stage of the game was dominated by the Packers. They didn't do a lot wrong. Very good week for them. And they sit at 8-8. I think that they are in a win-and-in situation in a week. I don't know, there's so many teams that are still in the playoff picture that it's actually a little bit hard to keep track of in my mind. I know that going into week 18, there are 20 teams in the playoff picture, that can still compete to be in the playoffs, which is tied for the most in NFL history. The situations are a bit murky. I think Green Bay with a victory goes to 9-8 and they can win and be in. Maybe other things need to happen. I'm not 100% sure. I know that the Seahawks are also at 8-8. That is a little bit harder to figure out. But interesting last 3 teams in this division. Obviously you have Detroit winning it for sure. They locked it up a little bit ago. And then you have Green Bay at 8-8, Minnesota at 7-9, and Chicago at 7-9. So based on what happens next week, do either of these teams? You could technically have. Who do the Bears play? What? The Bears play Green Bay.